She was just a weary single mother driving through the night, trying to make rent. He was a stranger, covered in blood, lying across the back seat, begging only for a ride home. What she didn't know was that the man she saved that night was a mafia boss, one willing to burn his entire empire to keep her safe. Rain poured down in relentless sheets, drumming against the windshield so hard that the wipers could barely keep up. Streetlights bled into streaks of gray water. Emily Sanders gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles pale white. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 2:42 a.m. 3 more hours until her shift ended. 3 more hours before she could crawl into the sagging bed of her rented apartment and slide under the blanket beside her son, pretending everything was fine, pretending she wasn't sinking deeper every day. Her son, Benji, was 8, asthmatic, and needed regular medication each month. The health insurance had lapsed over 6 months ago when she quit her job as an ER nurse to care for him after her husband died of pancreatic cancer. Now, Uber was all she had left. She worked nights because the tips were better and because the silence felt easier to bear. Her phone buzzed once. The dashboard screen lit up with a pickup request from a bar called Blue Bottle. On the west side of the city. Cash payment. Emily stared at the name. She knew that place. A seedy dive. The kind where people got stabbed over spilled drinks. The kind where drunk men thought a woman behind the wheel was an invitation. She reached for the decline button, then the phone rang. It was Tom, the dispatcher she'd worked with for months. His voice was rough. Urgent. Emily. You still online? I'm here, she said flatly. I've got a rush job from Blue Bottle. The bartender's paying $200 cash if you take this one. No questions. Just drive. Emily sat there in silence for a moment. $200. That was nearly half of Benji's medicine for the month. The overdue electric bill. 3 nights of sleep without worry. She swallowed hard. What's wrong with the passenger? Tom hesitated. Bartender says he's hurt. But he's got money. A lot of it. Emily closed her eyes. The image of Benji's nearly empty inhaler flashing in her mind. She thought of the eviction notice she had hidden beneath her mattress, praying the landlord's lawyer had forgotten about her. She opened her eyes. I'll take it. She turned onto a narrow street lined with flickering neon signs reflecting off puddles like broken glass. The bar appeared. Old and forgotten. The kind of place the city had long given up on. A man in a filthy apron stood smoking under the awning. Eyes wary. Emily rolled down her window an inch. You called for a car. The bartender nodded, crushing his cigarette into a puddle. Yeah. He's inside. Can you help me get him out? Emily froze. How bad is he? The man shrugged. Still breathing. That's all I know. She shut off the engine and stepped out, her canvas shoes squeaking in the flooded street. The door creaked as the bartender pushed it open for her. The smell hit her first whiskey and metal. Inside, bar stools lay toppled. Shards of glass glittered with smears of blood across the floor. And there, slumped against the counter, was a man. He wore a black suit, tailored and expensive. The collar soaked crimson. His hands were cut and swollen. One eye nearly swollen shut. Yet even in his brokenness, he carried something that made Emily stop in her tracks. Power. A quiet, heavy power that filled the air like static. Oh my God, she whispered. The bartender lowered his gaze. He stumbled in an hour ago. Said he'd pay if I called him a car. No cops. No ambulancy. Emily knelt beside the man. His breathing was shallow but steady. Hey, can you hear me? His right eye cracked open, a dark, bottomless well. Need to get home, he rasped, voice barely a whisper of wind. Where, she asked. He mumbled an address before his head tilted sideways. Unconscious again. She looked at the bartender. He nodded. Together. They dragged the man outside. He was heavy, pure muscle and blood. Limp as a corpse. They laid him across the back seat, his head resting against the window, legs sprawling over the cushions. Emily's hands trembled as she started the car. She typed the address manually. The GPS spun, then stopped on a name that froze her blood. Hollowstone Estate. Her heartbeat quickened. Everyone in the city knew that name. The Hollowstone mansion whispered in grocery aisles, murmured in diners. The place no ordinary person ever dared to approach. Emily glanced into the rearview mirror. The man's chest rose and fell faintly. She could leave him there. She could call the police. But she thought of Benji. She thought of the $200. And she drove. Rain hammered the windshield in a steady, punishing rhythm, like the echo of her own heart. She'd driven countless fares through the night, elderly women returning from casinos, drunk men passing out in the back seat, but never, not once, had she felt what she felt now. Fear tangled with curiosity, adrenaline mixed with dread. The taxi sliced through the wet suburban streets, the dim lights casting ghostly hues over the man's pale face. Emily checked the mirror again and again. Each time, he shifted slightly, his lips tightening as if he were fighting to stay conscious. Once, his eyes opened and met hers. He said nothing. No plea. No threat, just a look. Deep and searching, as if trying to see who she was and why she had agreed to carry a bleeding stranger through the freezing night. The road to Hollowstone twisted like a secret meant to stay hidden. Trees loomed tall on either side, their branches interlaced above like dark hands whispering things mortals weren't meant to hear. Emily tightened her grip on the wheel, trying to keep the tires from skidding over the slick mud. She had never been here before, but the name alone carried weight. Hollowstone was legend, a myth wrapped in money, power, and fear. People said those who lived there had everything: wealth, control, and ice in their veins. And tonight, one of them, or perhaps the one was bleeding out in her car, when the iron gates appeared through the rain strangely wide open. As if expecting her, a chill ran down her spine. The mansion emerged behind the veil of storm like a phantom, massive, cold. Its windows dark, its stone facade veined with moss. In the center of the courtyard stood a fountain long dry, the cracked statue reaching toward nothing. She parked near the steps. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Emily turned toward the back seat. "We're here," she said softly, trying to steady her voice. The man stirred, a low groan escaping him as he forced himself upright. His eyes were clearer now, sharp with awareness. Slowly, he reached inside his jacket, pulled out a leather wallet, and tossed it onto the front seat. "Take it. Whatever you want." Emily hesitated, then opened it. Her breath caught. Stacks of crisp $50 bills, neatly aligned. Far more than she had ever seen at once. She froze, tongue thick in her mouth. I can't take all this. You only owe $200. Like you said." But his tone carried no persuasion. It wasn't a request. It was an order. She lowered her head, hands shaking as she took exactly $200 and placed the wallet back on the seat. "Thank you," she whispered. She wasn't sure if she meant for the money, or for being alive. The man stepped out into the rain, unsteady but upright, one hand pressed against his side. He stood there for a long moment, then turned to look at her. Under the dim light, his face was hardened, cruel, exhausted, and strangely sorrowful. Then he turned away, staggering up the stone steps, leaving a trail of blood, like a line of red ink, bleeding into the night. Emily shifted into reverse, about to turn around, when suddenly the headlights of 2 black SUVs flared through the rain. She didn't even have time to react before they skidded to a stop, blocking her way out. All 4 doors burst open at once, and men dressed in black poured out like shadows, She saw their hands slip inside their jackets. She didn't need to ask. These were not good men. Instinct took over. Emily slammed her foot on the gas. Jerking the wheel hard to the right, the car fishtailed across the slick grass, the back tires spinning wildly until she nearly lost control. Shouts echoed behind her. Then a sharp crack split the air. A gunshot. Definitely a gunshot. But she didn't look back. She just drove, barreling through the thick hedge, tearing onto a muddy side road. Her heartbeat pounded like a drum. When she finally merged onto the highway and saw no cars following, her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. She pulled into a gas station, flung open the door, and threw up onto the curb. Her body shaking as if she'd just escaped a nightmare. Her mind hadn't yet processed. The phone vibrated inside her jacket pocket. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. 4 simple words. "You forgot your tip." Attached was a photograph of a black duffel bag placed neatly on her doorstep. Emily felt her blood turn to ice. He knew who she was. He knew where she lived. And this was only the beginning. The black bag was still there when Emily returned quietly at dawn. She stopped the car a few yards from the door, staring at the object lying on her porch as if it were a sleeping beast guarding the entrance to her fragile world. Her heart thudded hard, partly from fear, partly from a restless unease she couldn't name. The rain had finally stopped, and pale sunlight filtered through the gray clouds, glinting off puddles on the street. Everything looked normal again, but Emily knew nothing was normal anymore. She stepped carefully toward the porch, glancing up at the 3rd-floor window where old Mrs. Wilson, her neighbor, usually stood. No movement, no eyes watching. She knelt down, fingers trembling as she pulled the zipper open. Inside was money. A lot of money, stacked in thick bundles bound by wide rubber bands. 50s. Hundreds. Some bills still smeared with dried blood. On top lay a small white note, written in a man's clear, deliberate handwriting, to say thank you. Stay safe. No name. Just a single initial at the bottom, L. It didn't take long to guess. Emily knew exactly who had sent it. And what frightened her most wasn't that he had found her. It was how easily he had done it. He hadn't asked. Hadn't called. Hadn't needed to. He simply knew. As if her world had never been private. Never truly hers to begin with. She hid the duffel bag beneath the bed, deep in the shadowed corner, where Benji would never reach. Then took a scalding shower, trying to wash away whatever had clung to her from the night before. But water couldn't rinse away the feeling of being watched. 3 days later, her phone rang again. No caller ID. A man's voice came through low. Calm. Steady. She knew it immediately. Emily. This is Logan. He paused. I need to talk. About that night and about what's coming. I don't want anything to do with you, Emily said, gripping the phone so tight her knuckles ached. Thank you for the payment. But I've done my part. I know. Logan replied evenly. But others haven't. You're in danger. And I'm the only one who can keep you and your son safe. He hesitated, as if weighing his words. Meet me once. At the estate? It won't take long. If after that you still want to walk away, I'll respect it. Every instinct screamed, no. Her mind echoed it, loud and clear. But when she looked over at Benji asleep on the sofa, small hand clutching his stuffed dinosaur, she felt something heavier than fear responsibility. He only had her, and she was standing in the middle of a storm she couldn't understand. She needed answers. She needed to know what was truly happening. At 7 that evening, Emily stood before the iron gates of Hollowstone. They swung open without a sound. Just like before, but this time, it was deliberate. A man in a black suit with an earpiece opened her car door. His face was blank, but his posture was unmistakable. This was not a visit. It was a summons. The mansion looked even more intimidating up close. Gray stone walls, towering glass windows, pillars draped with moss. The silence was so complete that every footstep echoed sharply. Emily crossed the grand foyer. The polished, black-tiled hall lined with oil paintings under dim light that seemed to whisper secrets. No dust. No musty air. Everything was immaculate. Silent and dangerous. Logan waited at the end of the corridor beside a roaring stone fireplace. No blood now. No torn sweet. Just a man composed. Elegant. Frighteningly calm. The black suit fit perfectly. Tailored to his frame. But his eyes were the same. Deep. Wordless. Assessing like a man laying out chess pieces and watching how she'd move. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low, carrying an odd sincerity. "I know this is a lot to ask, but you need to understand after that night. People took notice of you. Of us." Emily nodded quietly, afraid to look away. "Who I am," he continued, "is not something you need to know in detail. It's enough to say that the things I'm involved in are not the kind you can simply walk away from. And I've never allowed an innocent person to suffer because of me." He paused. "Especially someone who saved my life." Emily said nothing. Her thoughts tangled. But one feeling rose above the confusion, a strange, growing curiosity. Not fear. Not anger. Something deeper. A pull toward the mystery standing before her. Toward this man and the dark world he belonged to. She left the Hollowstone mansion that night with more questions than answers. But one truth was clear. She and Benji were now part of a much larger game. And Logan somehow was both the queen and the player. When Emily returned to her small apartment, a hollow ache filled her chest. Everything that had happened inside Hollowstone felt unreal. Too sharp to be a dream, yet too distant to be life. No, this was a nightmare wearing the mask of reality. She had seen Logan's world with her own eyes, a place where every word carried weight. Every glance measured life and death. The mansion wasn't a home. It was a fortress. A place where power hid behind quiet walls and secrets slept in the dark. Logan hadn't said much, but each word he chose lingered heavy in her mind. Perhaps what terrified her most wasn't what he revealed, but what he refused to say. She took a quick cold shower to shake off the dizziness, then slipped into Benji's room. He was fast asleep, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. His soft breath, the only sound in the small apartment. Only when she looked at him did she feel anchored to the normal world again. Everything else was slipping beyond her grasp. The next morning, before sunrise, a knock startled her awake. Not a loud knock, but a soft, deliberate tapping. Steady and intentional. Emily peered through the window. On the doorstep sat a dark brown leather bag, perfectly placed, as if someone had taken care to position it just so. No one stood nearby. The stairs were empty. The neighborhood silent as ever. Not a soul in sight. Her heart pounded as Emily unlocked the door, grabbed the bag, and shut it quickly behind her. She set it on the table, hesitated for a few seconds, then pulled the zipper open. A faint scent of genuine leather drifted out. And then she froze. Inside was money. Piles and piles of it. She couldn't count it. But it had to be tens of thousands, perhaps more. The bundles were tightly bound with thick rubber bands, perfectly stacked, as if they'd just been withdrawn from a bank. She could see crisp $100 bills, the ink still sharp, and nestled among them, a small piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. "For your son's future. Consider it an apology. L." Emily's hands trembled so hard she nearly dropped the bag. It wasn't emotion. It was panic. She didn't know what to feel gratitude. Anger. Disbelief. Or terror. That amount of money could change everything. Pay off her debts. Give Benji a better life. Rewrite both their futures. But where had it come from? How had it arrived? And most of all, could she keep it without paying the price? She called the only friend she trusted, Julia. An accountant at a construction firm. Emily didn't share details. She just asked, "If someone left a bag of cash at your door, what would you do?" There was a long silence on the other end before Julia asked, "How much are we talking?" Emily bit her lip. "Maybe over 50,000. Julia gasped. "Oh my God. Emily. That's trouble. You have to call the police." "I can't," Emily whispered. "You know why?" She hung up, her pulse still quivering. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, she understood one thing. Clearly, no one in this world gives a gift like that without a price attached. Logan had never said it aloud. But every gesture, every glance carried the same unspoken message. She had stepped into his world that night. And stepping back out wouldn't be easy. That evening, while cleaning the kitchen, Emily saw someone standing across the street. A black car had parked there at some point. Its windows were tinted dark, impossible to see through. But she knew that feeling, the feeling of being watched. She pulled the curtains shut. Heart pounding, every nerve in her body screamed a warning. This was the first shock. And deep down, Emily knew it was only the beginning. The next morning, Emily woke earlier than usual. She hadn't slept at all. The black car had stayed there for hours, only driving off when dawn began to break. She hadn't seen a face. No one had knocked, but the silence hanging around her apartment was thick as fog. Suffocating. She had lived with fear long enough to recognize when she was being followed. And this time, the feeling was undeniable. She packed breakfast for Benji, drove him to school like always. She tried to act normal, but her eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. Every time a car stayed behind her too long, her heart jumped. Benji chattered happily about his science class, about the volcano model his teacher promised they'd build. Emily forced a smile, nodding at the right moments. But her mind spun with images, the bag of money, the faceless watchers, and Logan's name hovering like a blade above her head. At the school, she looked around. No suspicious cars, no strangers near the gate. She exhaled, just a little relief. But before she could turn away, a woman stepped out of the principal's office, calling her name. "You're Benjamin Torres's mother." Right. The woman was neatly dressed in business attire. Polite, but with sharp eyes. Emily nodded, instincts prickling. "Is something wrong? I'm Mrs. Anderson, the vice principal. We'd like to speak with you for a moment. If you have time." Emily tightened her grip on Benji's hand, a cold ripple running down her spine. "Is my son in trouble?" "No. Benny's fine. But this morning, a man came to the school. He claimed to be Benji's uncle and asked to pick him up early." Emily froze. Who was he? We couldn't verify his identity. When the office asked for ID, he got evasive and left. But the way he asked was too specific. He knew Benji's full name, his class, and even mentioned that you work late shifts. "Mrs. Anderson lowered her voice. "I think you should be careful. And maybe contact the police." Emily clutched Benji tightly, her heartbeat thundering. She nodded, thanked her, and almost dragged her son back to the car. Her thoughts were a storm. This wasn't just surveillance anymore. Someone had approached her child. And not just anyone, someone from the world Logan had spoken of with that frozen look in his eyes. She didn't drive home. Instead, she circled through multiple streets, turning randomly, watching to see if anyone followed. Once, a black sedan took the same turns 3 times. On the 4th, she suddenly pulled into a gas station and stopped. The sedan kept going, but her relief never came. If they had found the school, they could find anywhere. That night, after Benji was asleep, Emily stood by the window, looking out. And this time, there was no mistaking it. The same car, the same spot, the same silence. She picked up her phone, hesitated a long time. Then, with no other choice, she scrolled through her old messages. The number wasn't saved. Only one line of text she'd once convinced herself to ignore. If anything happens, just message. Her fingers trembled as she typed Benji's school. A stranger came asking for him. What's happening? The reply came in less than a minute. I'll handle it. Lock your doors. Don't go outside. That was all. No explanation. No comfort. But somehow, she knew it was Logan. And she also knew if he was already aware, things were about to get much worse. Because in Logan's world, there was no such thing as simple surveillance. His world smelled of blood, shadow, and warnings that were never idle. The supermarket wasn't far from Emily's apartment just down the main road, where the fluorescent lights always made everything look colder, less real. She didn't want to go out at night. Not after what had happened at Benji's school. But the fridge was empty, and her son still needed breakfast. She asked Mrs. Rita, the elderly neighbor, to watch him for a while, then threw on her coat and drove out, her chest heavy with invisible fears that were drawing closer with each mile. Emily pushed her cart down the aisles, eyes skimming over cereal boxes and milk cartons without truly seeing them. Her mind was elsewhere on the man who'd shown up at Benji's school, on the message, on the black car under her window. She didn't know what she was caught in, but one thing was certain: this wasn't coincidence. No one knew her son's name, his class, and her work schedule, unless they were watching. She reached for a loaf of bread, then felt it. Someone behind her. No touch. No sound. Just a sudden, primal awareness. The kind that only single mothers who've lived through struggle truly recognize. Her body went rigid. Ms. Emily, a low voice said, close enough to feel the air shift. She turned, heart squeezing tight. A man stood there in a black coat, hair cropped short. Not tall, not bulky, but his eyes were cold as steel. And most unsettling of all, he knew her name. Who I am doesn't matter, he said in a flat, deliberate tone, like reading from a report. Mr. Logan sent me. Don't be afraid. Emily stepped back half a pace, gripping the handle of the cart, glancing around. No one was close. The other shoppers were scattered down the aisle, lost in their own worlds. The silence between the shelves felt suffocating. He told me you wouldn't text back. The man continued. Said you're stubborn, but you should listen carefully. He pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket. Someone's tracking you. Not just the school, your home, your workplace, your son's routine. You don't have much time. Emily didn't take the note, but her eyes locked on it. An address, not one she recognized. Her voice came out shaky, breathless. Who are you? What are you people dragging me into? The man folded the paper and slid it back into his pocket. I'm the one keeping you alive. And if you hesitate any longer, the next person who comes won't be as polite as I am. He gave a small nod, then turned and walked away, vanishing into the aisle, as if he'd never been there at all. Emily stood frozen, her legs turned to stone, both hands gripping the cart handle. She exhaled slowly, then hurried toward the checkout counter. The groceries in her cart were barely enough for tomorrow's breakfast, but she couldn't think of buying anything else. On the drive home, she went straight to Mrs. Rita's house and wrapped her arms around Benji as if afraid he might vanish. The boy looked up and asked softly, Mom, what's wrong? She shook her head. Nothing. Sweetheart, I'm just tired. That night, Emily sat at the kitchen table, the small paper bag before her, She opened it and found the folded note the man at the supermarket had given her, the one she hadn't even realized she'd taken. On it, handwritten in tight letters, Wednesday. Tin P. M. Address the warehouse behind Dock 7. Come alone. She glanced at Benji sleeping on the couch, then back at the note. She had no idea what she was walking into, or who would be waiting. But she knew one thing, from the moment she let Logan Moretti into her car that rainy night. Her life had stopped belonging to normalcy, and now the only certainty left was that she couldn't turn back. Emily parked 2 blocks from the warehouse behind Dock 7. She didn't want to draw attention. Yet even in the darkest quarter of the city she felt eyes on her. There were no streetlights here. Only the pale shimmer of water reflecting distant lamps and the faint thud of waves against rusted hulls. She walked slowly, hands tucked into her coat pockets, palms icy with tension. Each step echoed across the concrete, unnervingly loud. The warehouse door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of light spilling out. Emily stopped before touching the handle. She inhaled deeply and pushed. The hinges groaned, long and metallic, the kind of sound that once terrified her in childhood movies. Inside, the space was vast, hollow, and cold. But at the far end, beside a wide wooden table, sat a man with his back to her. She didn't need to see his face to know who it was. He rose before she could speak, turning slowly, as if he'd sensed every step she took since she crossed the threshold. His face was the same, less swollen, less bruised than the night she'd found him bleeding, but there was something different in his eyes now. A heaviness, a darkness she recognized but didn't welcome. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice low and rough, yet warm, not the voice of a man used to giving orders. "I know you had every reason not to." Emily stood a few paces away, keeping an invisible barrier between them. "I didn't come because you asked," she said steadily. "I came because someone's threatening my son." Logan nodded, as if he'd expected it. "I know, and I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. But now you're here, and here, you're safer than anywhere else." "Safe," her tone sharpened. "My son's school is being watched. Someone came to my door. The only reason I didn't call the police is because I'm starting to believe they're worse than the people chasing us." Logan was silent for a moment, then took a step closer. He stopped when there was only an arm's length between them. "I never wanted this to touch you," he said quietly. "You deserve the truth." "Then start talking," Emily replied, though her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. Logan exhaled slowly. "My name is Logan Moretti. My family runs what the newspapers like to call an organized crime syndicate. I thought I could walk away, retire, disappear. But the night I got into your car, I was running from a purge. Someone inside betrayed me. I was the target. If you hadn't picked me up, I'd be dead." Emily stared at him, her silence louder than words, anger, fear, and something that might have been disappointment flickering across her face. "I never meant to drag you into this," he went on, "but there are people who think you know something. Maybe where I was hiding. Maybe nothing at all. With men like that, the reason doesn't matter. They just need one." Emily bit her lip, thinking of Benji, of the sleepless nights, of her son's frightened eyes. "So what now?" she asked. "What are you going to do?" Logan stepped back and leaned against the table. "I'm going to protect you and Benji. I already had people watching, but it wasn't enough. I need to move you somewhere safe until this is over." She let out a short, bitter laugh. Sounds awfully generous for a mafia boss. "No," Logan said, meeting her gaze. "It's not generosity. It's a plea." Emily froze. There was something raw in his voice, honesty, or perhaps regret that loosened something inside her chest. Still, she held her guard. I don't know if I can trust you." I didn't know who to trust either. Logan murmured. "Not until I sat bleeding in your car and you didn't leave me to die." Silence filled the warehouse again, broken only by the wind whistling through the cracks. Emily turned away, walked a few steps, then faced him once more. "Benji is everything I have. If anything happens to him, no one will touch him." Logan cut in, voice like steel. "I swear it." Emily held his gaze for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "I'll pack." And in that moment, though neither said it aloud, both knew this wasn't about one rainy night anymore. It was the beginning of something larger, more dangerous and far harder to escape. Emily hardly slept after meeting Logan at the docks. His calm tone, his controlled certainty, it should have been reassuring. But her heart was chaos. Fear, anger, love for her son all collided inside her until she couldn't breathe. She no longer knew whom to trust, and she feared the day she'd wake to find Benji gone, erased as if he'd never existed. Before dawn, she cleaned the kitchen, folded their clothes, and packed 2 worn canvas bags with essentials. She wasn't leaving because she trusted Logan. She was leaving because there was no other choice. That morning, the first cracks began to show. When she dropped Benji off at school, he sat unusually quiet, eyes fixed out the window, as though sensing the tension around them. She smiled, touched his soft hair, told him to eat lunch, to be careful, but her smile fell apart the moment she drove off. A car sat parked at the corner across the street. She had never seen it before, but it wasn't the vehicle itself that chilled her. It was the man inside, the same one from the supermarket, the one who claimed to work for Logan. Now he sat beside another man, a stranger with the same brutal, inhuman stare she'd seen once before. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just watched. And the way they watched told Emily everything. This was a warning. She walked quickly to her car, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She didn't drive home. Instead, she zigzagged through back streets, checking the mirrors again and again. She began noticing cars without plates. A man in a hat loitering near the grocery store opposite her building. When she finally returned to her block, she saw it. The back door had been tampered with. Scratches around the lock. Fresh ones. Shallow but clear. Emily bolted up the stairs to her apartment, running straight for the bedroom. Nothing was stolen, but she saw the signs. Benji's pillow was crooked, the desk drawer left open, the photo on her nightstand turned face down. They had been inside, not to rob, to send a message. Her hands shaking, she dialed the last number from her old messages, Logan's. She didn't even type. Within a minute, the phone rang. His voice came through, deep and urgent. "Emily, they got into my house," she whispered, lips trembling. "No one saw. No one heard. But I know. Someone was here." Logan was silent for a few seconds, then spoke quickly, decisively. "Pack everything you can carry. Only what's necessary. I'm sending someone in 10 minutes. Emily looked around the apartment. The cracked paint on the walls. The old chair where she read to Benji every night. The framed photos of rare, peaceful days. All of it was part of the life she'd fought to hold together for years. But now, it was no longer home. It was a weakness. A vulnerability. A place where someone could enter at any moment and take away what mattered most. When the knock came exactly 10 minutes later, Emily was ready. A man in a black suit, face expressionless, stood in the doorway. He said nothing, only nodded and opened the trunk of the black SUV idling outside. Emily carried Benji still half asleep and stepped out of the apartment as if leaving behind her own life. They didn't drive straight to Logan's location. The car weaved through 3 main roads, then switched vehicles once in the underground parking lot of a hotel. When they got into the new car, the driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Logan wants you to know this isn't a kidnapping. It's a rescue." Emily didn't answer. She sat still, arms wrapped around Benji, whose head rested heavily on her lap, his small chest rising and falling in sleep. Her mind spun with unspoken questions. But one truth had crystallized. Logan's world was no longer a vague shadow. It was closing in, tightening like a rope around her neck. And if she didn't leave now, if she hesitated even one more night, she could lose everything. Not just her home, her son, herself. The car cut through the darkness, and Emily knew there was no turning back. The cabin appeared after the SUV wound through a narrow dirt road between towering pine trees. Early sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering patches of gold across the windshield, making it feel as though they were crossing into another world. Emily clutched Benji close. He was still asleep, his tousled hair brushing her chin. She had never been this far from the city, never lived anywhere without the sound of traffic or the voices of neighbors arguing through thin walls. But now, she wasn't thinking about change. She was thinking about survival. The car stopped in front of a small 2-story cabin built of oak, its slanted roof half covered in moss, surrounded by an eerie kind of stillness. The only sounds were faint birdsong and the whisper of wind through the trees. Logan was already waiting on the porch. Knock-o-it, hands in his pockets, gaze steady as the car pulled in. He stepped forward when the door opened, but not hurriedly moving, with the careful calm of someone who understood that every gesture now needed to be gentle, deliberate, like crossing a fragile bridge. "Welcome," he said quietly as Emily stepped out. Still holding Benji, his voice was lower than it had been at the warehouse. Less cold, touched by something that sounded like gratitude. Emily didn't answer, only nodded once, her eyes sweeping over the cabin before settling on him. Logan didn't push her to speak. He simply turned, opened the front door, and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the cabin was unexpectedly warm. The scent of pine mixed with a faint trace of mint. A stone fireplace glowed in the center of the living room. Above it sat a few books and a framed black and white photograph. Everything was simple, orderly, clean, not at all what she imagined a criminal hideout would look like. It looked more like a home than any place she'd lived in years. "Your room's upstairs," Logan said, keeping a respectful distance. "I had it prepared this morning. If you need anything, just tell me." Emily looked up the wooden staircase, then back at him. "You live here alone?" Logan nodded. "Almost a year now. Just me, the woods, and silence." Benji stirred in her arms, nestling his face against her neck. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered. "We're here." Then she carried him upstairs without another word. The room was exactly as Logan had described: 2 small beds, pale brown sheets, a window overlooking the forest where the morning light filtered softly through linen curtains. Nothing luxurious, nothing excessive, but it was the first place in days where she felt her shoulders finally loosen. She laid Benji down, tucked the blanket carefully around him, and sat beside the bed, watching his steady breathing. The dark circles beneath her eyes hadn't faded, but the fear inside her had softened a little. At least here. There were no peepholes, no eyes watching from parked cars, no strangers lurking near the school gates. After a while, she went downstairs. Logan was pouring coffee, his movements surprisingly practiced. When he noticed her, he handed her a mug without asking whether she wanted it. Just handed it to her, as if he already knew. "It's bitter," he murmured. "I don't have milk." Emily accepted it, took a sip. It was bitter sharply, but she didn't complain. There was something real in that bitterness, something alive. They stood in silence for a while. The quiet thick enough to touch. Outside. The wind sighed through the trees. Inside. It pressed between them. Full of questions neither dared to voice. "How long do you think we'll be here?" she asked at last. "Until things settle." Logan replied, "Until I'm sure no one can reach you, or your son." Emily met his eyes. And after that, he didn't answer immediately. He set his cup down on the wooden table, gaze never leaving hers. After that, "If you want, you can go back to your life, and I'll disappear, as if I never existed." She didn't know why, but those words sank heavily in her chest, as if he had already chosen his role in this story, the unseen protector who never stays. And she wasn't sure whether that made things easier or harder. "Benji will wake up soon," she said, setting her cup down. "I'll make something for breakfast. There are eggs, bread, and some blueberry jam." Logan replied, "My old neighbor brought them over." "You have a neighbor?" she asked, almost incredulous. "2 miles away," he said, "but they don't ask questions. Around here, people are used to not knowing who lives next door." Emily turned toward the window, where the pines were swaying gently in the wind. She didn't know what awaited them next. But for now, in this quiet cabin in the woods, she and Benji still had each other, and they had a man who had sworn to protect them, though she couldn't yet tell what that promise would cost. Night fell fast in the deep woods. By 6 o'clock, the sky outside had already turned to ink, leaving only the cabin's warm glow to carve out a small refuge of light. Emily stood by the stove, flipping a pancake in a cast-iron pan, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the strange weight of stillness. The quiet felt wrong, unnatural. She had grown used to the city's noise, to the clatter of traffic, to arguments seeping through paper-thin walls. Here, the silence was so complete, she could hear the wind brushing against the trees, the faint groan of old timber settling in the cold. Benji sat at the dining table, his eyes still puffy from sleep, but brighter now. He was coloring in a small book, glancing around as if trying to make sense of why everything looked so different today. Emily smiled at him, her expression soft enough to hide the storm still spinning inside. Across the table, Logan sat quietly, unmoving, almost statue-like. He had changed into a clean white shirt, buttoned neatly. He didn't look like a man on the run. He looked like a man who had once lost more than he could bear, a solitary figure. Composed yet haunted, the golden light of the lamp caught on his sharp profile, the faint scars along his wrist, and in his eyes, those dark, endless eyes, there was always the same thing, a mind somewhere far away. When the last pancake was placed on the plate, Emily set the table, dividing portions for each of them. Logan murmured a quiet thank you, while Benji cheered happily at being allowed something sweet for dinner. The three of them sat around the small wooden table, in a modest but spotless kitchen, and for that fleeting moment, they looked like a small family ending an ordinary day. Emily ate slowly, listening to the soft clinking of knives and forks, then turned to Logan. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, her tone gentler than she'd intended. Logan finished chewing before replying. "Taught myself. My mother was often sick when I was young. I had to learn to take care of her." "Is she still alive?" Emily asked, her voice faltering slightly at the word still. Logan shook his head, meeting her gaze without flinching. "She died when I was 15. After that, I lived with my father, then with others. No one ever cooked for me again. Except me." Emily studied him for a moment, then lowered her eyes to her plate. She understood. That kind of silence, the way he spoke without sentiment, was armor. The same kind she wore. Only his was thicker, better built. After a while, Logan set down his utensils and leaned back in his chair. his eyes resting on Benji. "He's a good kid," he said. "Smart. Observant. Like his mother. I hope he's not like me," Emily said softly, her voice unexpectedly trembling. "I hope he doesn't have to be strong too soon." Logan said nothing. He understood better than anyone what it meant to be forced to grow up before your time. After a moment of quiet, he spoke again, his voice deep and distant, as if recounting a memory to himself. "Once, early in my career, I was assigned to guard a warehouse. Simple job. But that night, I heard crying. A child, locked inside a shipping crate. A human shipment. I called my superior. He told me to leave it. Said someone would come for it in the morning." Emily held her breath. She knew she was hearing something she probably shouldn't. But she didn't stop him. "What did you do?" she asked. "I opened the crate. Carried the baby out. Left it at the steps of a clinic with an envelope of cash. No name." And then she whispered, "No one ever found out. Or maybe they did." And they looked the other way. They thought I was still useful. But from that night, I knew I couldn't stay numb forever. Benji ran into the living room to fetch a toy. Then came back, giggling. Emily watched him go. Then turned back to Logan. Her eyes steady. "You're not like them," she said. "Don't believe that." Logan replied, his voice rough. "I've done far worse things. But that night, that was the first time I felt fear. Not fear of being caught, fear that if I didn't act, I'd stop being human altogether." Emily rested her hand on the table, not touching him, but close enough for him to feel her warmth. "I don't know who you are beyond what I've seen," she said quietly, "but I know that night, in my car, you didn't look like a monster. And you still don't." Logan looked at her for a long time, so long that her heartbeat slowed to match his silence. In his eyes there was gratitude, sorrow, and something unnamed. Something heavy that neither dared acknowledge. Benji yawned, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, I'm sleepy." Emily stood, scooping him up. "You'll sleep in the room next to me. Tomorrow we'll unpack your books and make you a little shelf." "Okay," Logan rose, lifting his cup of cold coffee. "I'll stay up tonight. Keep watch, so you can rest." Emily nodded, carrying Benji upstairs, leaving Logan alone in the kitchen. When the door closed behind her, he sat back down, eyes fixed on nothing, fingers unconsciously brushing the faint scar along his wrist. The night was quiet, but inside him, a storm was rising, and in that silence, he knew he wasn't just protecting two people. He was trying to save the last piece of his soul still left unbroken. Near midnight, the cabin was drenched in an oppressive stillness. The forest outside slept under the cold breath of wind, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood and the soft crackle of dying fire. Logan sat alone in the living room, his gun resting on the table, his eyes on the dark window. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't dare. Something inside him stirred a warning, an instinct sharpened by years among wolves. Quiet nights always came before the storm, and this time, the storm wore the face of someone he trusted most. Marco entered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Logan glanced at him but didn't reach for his cup. Marco had once owed him his life, the same man he had assigned to guard Emily and her son, because he believed he was the last person who would ever betray him. But lately, Marco's eyes had changed. Too calm, too still. Logan finally took the cup, but didn't drink. He watched Marco lower himself into the opposite chair, his shoulders loose, his hands hidden beneath the table. "Cold night," Marco said, staring into the fire. "I checked around the house. Everything's quiet." Logan nodded slightly, his hand still near the gun. "Thanks. I know you keep an eye on things." Marco smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it, I used to think I owed you my life. But dead don't last forever. Do they? Logan's grip tightened around the gun. What are you talking about? Marco's hand emerged from beneath the table, but not with a mug. With a gun. Black. Sleek. Pointed straight at Logan. I'm sorry. Logan, he said softly. Almost like a farewell instead of betrayal. Russo made an offer I couldn't refuse. And you know how it goes. No one works for you forever. Logan didn't wait. He rolled aside just as the shot exploded. The bullet tearing through the chair where he'd been sitting. He hit the floor, grabbed his weapon, and fired back. The bullet caught Marco in the shoulder, spinning him backward with a howl of pain. The gunfire shattered the cabin's calm. Emily jolted awake upstairs, clutching Benji tight as the shots echoed below. She heard wood splinter, furniture crash, and the sharp cries of pain laced with fury. Her heart pounded wildly, but her mind stayed sharp. She pulled Benji from the bed, dragged him to the door, locked it, then shoved the dresser against it. The boy trembled, wide-eyed. Mom, what's happening? It's okay. Sweetheart, stay with me. Don't move. We'll be fine. Downstairs. Logan was pinned against the wall, blood seeping from his arm where the bullet had grazed him. Marco had shed every trace of loyalty, no longer a bodyguard, but a hunter. You can't keep them safe forever. Marco snarled. Russo will take her. He'll use the boy to drag you out. And this time, you won't save anyone. Logan fired back, shattering the glass window behind Marco, forcing him to duck behind a bookshelf. Logan rolled forward, firing 2 more rounds, driving Marco toward the kitchen. The fight became a brutal rhythm every breath, every shot carrying the weight of everything they'd once been. Blood streaked the wooden floor. Marco kept shouting, his voice ragged. You're too soft. Logan, too weak because of a woman and a child. That's why you'll die tonight. You're wrong. Logan replied, his eyes cold as ice. Because of them, I'm still alive. He leapt onto the table, aimed, and fired. The moment Marco's head appeared from behind the shelf, a single shot. No hesitation. Marco fell backward, eyes still open, disbelief frozen on his face, as if he couldn't accept that the man who ended him was once the brother who saved his life. Then everything went silent. Only the ragged sound of breathing and the acrid smell of gunpowder lingered. Logan stood amid the wreckage, blood dripping from his arm, his gaze fixed on the staircase. When he was sure there was no more danger, he ran upstairs. Emily opened the door at his triple knock, their signal. She pulled Benji into her arms, eyes red and trembling. Marco, she whispered. He's dead, Logan said flatly. He was working for Russo. And I believe he wasn't the only one. Emily gasped. We have to go. Logan nodded. Right now. Pack Benji's things. I have a backup car behind the cabin. We'll head somewhere safer. And you, I'm coming with you. Until I'm sure no one can touch you again. Emily looked at him, saw the streak of blood on his hardened face. But also something deeper. Exhaustion. And a resolve that had no escape left. Logan, she murmured. You can't keep fighting forever. I'm not fighting, he said quietly. I'm protecting. And this time, I won't fail. They left the cabin in the night, carrying only what they needed. Wind swept through the smoke still hanging in the air. Logan didn't look back. He knew if he did, he'd see nothing but ashes and betrayal. Ahead where Emily and her son were headed was the only thing left in him worth saving hope. The old pickup roared into the dark, its tires sliding over mud and gravel as headlights sliced through the fog-drenched mountain road. Emily held Benji tight, her heart pounding each time the vehicle jolted across uneven ground. The boy had fallen asleep from exhaustion, his head resting against her chest, his small hand still clutching the little toy car Logan had given him days before. Logan gripped the wheel, his face tense. The dried blood on his arm crusted dark against pale skin. He'd lost too much already, blood. Time. Peace, but he kept driving. His jaw clenched. No one spoke. Only the engine's growl filled the silence. A mechanical heartbeat urging them deeper into the unknown. Outside, rain began to tap against the windshield. Logan glanced at his watch, then turned down a narrow trail, hidden behind a dense row of trees. No signs. No lights. Only an old dirt road winding into the forest's heart. How much farther, Emily asked, her voice trembling. Not far. Logan replied. I know a place. No one's been there in years. She didn't ask more. She trusted him, even after everything had fallen apart. His eyes, shadowed but steady, were the only thing she could still hold on to. 5 minutes later, they reached a clearing. Hidden behind overgrown trees stood a forgotten stone chapel. Its roof half collapsed. Windows shattered. Ivy crawling up its weathered walls. Logan killed the engine, exhaling slowly before stepping out into the cold. Emily followed, cradling Benji still fast asleep in her arms. The night air bit at their faces, carrying the damp scent of moss and decay. What is this place? She asked. An old chapel, Logan said. Used as a shelter during the war. No one remembers it now. They pushed through the sagging doors. Inside was darkness but dry. Moonlight filtered through the broken glass, illuminating rows of splintered pews and a dust-covered altar. Their footsteps echoed through the hollow air, haunting, like the echo of an abandoned prayer. Logan switched on his phone flashlight and guided Emily into a small back room behind the sanctuary. Here, he said. At least for tonight. We'll be safe. Emily laid Benji down on a thin blanket Logan had taken from the truck, covering him carefully. She sat beside her son, eyes following Logan as he inspected every corner, every cracked window, every possible entrance. He moved like a man who had lived his whole life, hunted, always waiting for a bullet that hadn't yet found him. Are you sure they can't track us here? She asked, as he returned. I blew up the cabin before we left, Logan said evenly. If they find anything, it'll be ashes. We have a few hours before they figure out this direction. Emily nodded, trying to stay composed. But fear was spreading inside her like a quiet fog. Not fear of dying, but fear of losing this fragile piece they'd just begun to touch. Logan sat down, his back against the cold stone wall. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. I can't keep you and Benji running like this, he said. So what will you do? She asked softly. I'm going to end it, he answered, his gaze fixed on the cracked ceiling. Russo, the rest of them, I'll find them before they find you. And if you don't make it in time, she whispered. He was silent for a long beat, then turned to her. For the first time since they left the cabin, she saw the same eyes she'd seen that first night in the rain, tired, scarred, but burning with the same unyielding fire. Then at least, he said quietly, I'll drag them to hell with me. Emily didn't know whether to fear or believe him. All she knew was that beside this man in this broken chapel, in the midst of night and danger, she felt less alone than she had in years. Benji stirred in his sleep, murmuring, Mom, don't go. Emily stroked his hair gently, then whispered, to him, to Logan, to herself, to the world waiting outside. We're not giving up. Not this time. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, but within the rotting silence of the old chapel, 3 people clung to one another, keeping a fragile light alive against the darkness closing in. The sky hadn't yet lightened when the sound of an engine broke the stillness. Logan shot to his feet, movements quick but slower than usual. The wound in his left shoulder had started to throb again. He tilted his head, listening, then turned to Emily, who was holding Benji asleep in her arms at the corner of the room. His voice came low, urgent, a whisper sharp enough to wake her instantly. "There's a car coming. We have to go. Now." Emily blinked the sleep from her eyes, nodded, and bent to pick up Benji. Everything was gathered in less than a minute. Logan led the way, gun drawn, eyes locked on the blackness outside the shattered window. They slipped out through the back, ducking beneath dripping branches, their footsteps barely brushing the damp earth. The old pickup was still where they'd left it, hidden behind a thicket. Logan opened the door for Emily and Benji, then circled to the driver's side. But just as he climbed in, a blinding light flared across the forest road. Headlights high and harsh cut through the trees. A black SUV burst from the shadows, blocking their escape like a predator cornering its prey. There was no time to think. Logan threw the truck into reverse, tires shrieking as they tore through mud and gravel. The truck fishtailed. It spun, then veered down a narrow side trail. The SUV roared after them, its engine growling like a beast in pursuit. Benji woke with a start, eyes wide in terror. Emily pulled him close, lowering her body to shield his small frame from whatever might come. Logan didn't look away from the road, his hands gripping the wheel, his jaw locked tight. Branches lashed against the windshield like claws. But he didn't slow down. A gunshot cracked behind them. The bullet struck the tailgate, jolting the truck violently. Emily screamed, but Logan steadied the wheel, his voice low, fierce. "It's all right." He hissed half to her, half to himself. "We're not done yet. I still have something left to do." The narrow path led down a steep slope, and below it, the highway shimmered under the faint moonlight. Logan didn't hesitate. He slammed the accelerator, letting the truck plunge downward at a speed that set every instinct in his body screaming. When the tires hit asphalt, the truck swerved violently but didn't overturn. He corrected the steering just in time, merging into the sparse flow of cars on the main road. The black SUV behind them couldn't handle the sudden drop. It stalled halfway down, then vanished into the trees. Logan said nothing. The pain in his left shoulder had sharpened, his hand beginning to tremble. Blood seeped through his black shirt, smearing the seatbelt. Emily noticed first. "Logan, you're hurt." He nodded, lips pressed tight, silent. He knew that if he spoke now, he might lose what little focus he had left. Emily glanced at the dashboard clock. Nearly 3 a.m. "We need a place to rest," she said. He didn't argue. Half an hour later, they pulled up to a roadside motel, small, worn, its neon sign flickering. The front desk empty. Emily went inside, booked a room under a false name, and paid in cash. Logan leaned against the wall as he entered, his face pale, but his eyes still alert. She tucked Benji into the bed first, covering him gently, then turned back to Logan, who sat at the edge of the other bed, peeling off his shirt with his right hand. His left arm was soaked in blood. Emily grabbed the small first aid kit from her backpack. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I've stitched wounds before. On Benji. It won't look pretty, but it'll keep you alive." Logan gave a faint, raspy chuckle. "You can do it. I trust you." She disinfected the wound and began sewing, eyes fixed on the gash. Logan clenched his jaw but didn't make a sound, sweat dripping down his forehead. When she tied off the final stitch, she exhaled shakily, as though surfacing from deep water. "You need to rest," she said. Logan lay back without protest, closing his eyes, his hand still close to the gun beneath his pillow. Emily sat beside Benji, pulling her son close. The room fell silent. Only their heartbeats and the uneven rhythm of a night survived by instinct. And in that fragile, quiet, though she knew dawn would bring more danger, Emily felt, for the first time in a long while, something gentle settle in her chest, the fragile calm of survival, even if only for a moment. Morning came softly. Sunlight filtered through the thin motel curtains in pale, weary streaks. Time itself seemed to slow in that small, forgotten town. Emily woke first. She turned to see Benji still asleep, his face peaceful, in a way that didn't belong to the chaos of last night. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake him, and looked toward the opposite bed. Logan was sitting up against the headboard, shirt off on one side, a fresh bandage wrapped neatly around his shoulder. He was replacing the old dressing, moving with the patience of someone long accustomed to tending his own wounds. Emily approached, about to speak, but stopped when she saw the quiet focus on his face. "You should let me do that," she said softly. "I've got the hang of it now." Logan offered a small smile, one that never reached his eyes. He handed her the roll of gauze. "Thank you. But today, let me do it myself." She frowned, but didn't argue. Logan pulled a curved suture needle from his pocket, professional-grade Anami, meant for deep wounds. His hand still trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady, unwavering. Emily watched as he threaded the needle and pushed it through his own skin, one stitch at a time. Blood welled, dark and slow. Yet he didn't flinch, didn't groan, just breathed through the pain, sealing the torn flesh with each deliberate motion. She thought then that perhaps the real pain inside him had long stopped coming from wounds like this. When he finished the last stitch, he set the needle down, securing the bandage with a clean strip of tape. Then he looked up and his gaze met hers. For a moment, in that dim light, surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and the faint trace of blood, something softened in both of them. "You once asked me why I chose this path," he said quietly. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. He sighed and turned toward the misted window. "My father was one of the men who built the largest syndicate on the East Coast. I grew up under his rules, his shadow. Every lesson was about control, power, obedience. There were no choices. If I'd rebelled, I'd have been erased like every traitor before me. So I survived, followed orders, and in the end, I inherited everything." He paused, his eyes darkening, as though remembering something too heavy to name. "I've done terrible things, Emily. Things that, if I told you, you'd never want to see my face again." She stayed silent, waiting. "I used to believe redemption was for good people," he went on, "that men like me were born only to destroy, to kill, to do what others wouldn't. But then that night, in your car when I thought I was dying, you didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask what I'd done. You weren't afraid. You just drove. Silent. Steady. You let me live." He turned toward her then, his eyes locking onto hers. "You gave me something no one else ever has. A chance to be human. To be weak. To just exist." Emily didn't know what to say. Her chest felt heavy, not from the confessions themselves, but from the sorrow inside his voice. The man before her, whatever his name, whatever his past was, simply someone exhausted by his own existence, trying to scrub the blood from his hands with the only thing pure enough to touch a second chance. He lowered his head, voice rough. "I don't know if I can ever make things right, but if there's even one way to fix what I've broken to protect you and Benji, to end what I started, I'll take it, no matter the cost." Emily placed her hand over his. His skin was cold, but her warmth seeped into it, a silent forgiveness, one that didn't need words. "You've already started," she whispered, "not by killing more, but by choosing to live differently, for yourself, for others, For the chance to begin again? Logan looked at her for a long moment. His eyes softened. He squeezed her hand gently but said nothing. Outside, the wind brushed against the window. And within that silence, something inside both of them felt just a little lighter. 3 days passed since the night Logan was shot. They hadn't left the cramped motel room, taking turns keeping watch, stepping out only to buy food, keeping the truck always ready to flee. Benji seemed to sense the tension, uncharacteristically quiet and obedient, clutching the little toy car Logan had given him like a talisman. Early on the 4th morning, Logan woke before dawn, standing before the bathroom mirror. He removed his bandage. The wound had scabbed but still ached. The stitches he'd sewn himself ringed by faint traces of dried blood. He stared at his reflection for a long time. Stubble covered his jaw. His hair was tangled, his eyes hollow. No longer the powerful man he once was, not Vincent Moretti. The name that once made the East Coast tremble. Now, he was just a fugitive, a man already half gone. When Emily awoke, Logan was seated at the table, a thick envelope resting neatly in front of him. She sat up, confusion flashing across her face. He was wearing his jacket, his boots already laced. She didn't need to ask. She knew what was happening. He was leaving. "You're awake," he said softly. His eyes on her, no pleading left in them. No grief. Only a quiet sadness that ached deeper than pain. "You're leaving." Her voice trembled, but her composure held. He nodded. "It's time I disappear. To cut everything off. To make sure you and Benji can have a life that's peaceful. A real one." Emily was silent for a long moment, then pointed at the envelope on the table. "What's in it?" "New identities," he said. "New names for you and Benji. Legal papers. A bank account with enough money to start over anywhere you choose. There's also a note with a lawyer's contact. He'll handle the rest. Everything's clean." Emily opened the envelope. Inside were 2 passports, each bearing names that weren't theirs. Sarah Bennett and her son Jacob Bennett. Her hands went cold as she stared at them, as if looking at a version of herself she didn't yet recognize, a life far removed from the one that had nearly destroyed her. "And you?" she asked. "How will you live after walking away from everything?" Logan stepped toward the window and drew the curtain back slightly. The pale morning light caught the lines of exhaustion etched across his face. His voice was calm, almost weightless. "I won't be Logan anymore. I've prepared for this. A new identity. A place no one knows. No weapons. No soldiers. No organization. No blood." He turned back to her. "You once said something I can't forget, that I could live differently. Without violence. Without hate. And I believed you. I believed that if you could trust me, then maybe I could trust a version of myself I haven't met yet." Emily bit her lip, a knot tightening in her chest. She stepped closer and took his hand. It was warm, but trembling, carrying the weight of a lifetime's worth of wrong choices. "Will you promise to come back?" she asked, unable to meet his eyes. He paused. Then, slowly, "No, because if I promise and fail, you'll hate me forever. But if one day you see a man walk into a small bakery somewhere, order a black coffee with no sugar, and somehow already know your son's name, maybe that's me." Her tears brimmed, but she smiled, a fragile, aching smile of acceptance. "Then I'll wait. But only if you truly find yourself first." Logan leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, long, lingering, wordless. Then he turned to Benji, still sleeping peacefully. He crouched, pulled the boy into a silent embrace, and held him tight. He didn't dare wake him. From his pocket, he drew a small piece of paper and scribbled, "If one day you miss Uncle Logan, look at the red toy car. It knows how to find me." He stood, zipped his jacket, and walked to the door. When it closed behind him, Emily could hear only his fading footsteps down the hall. Swallowed by the distant hum of passing cars, she clutched the envelope to her chest, tears spilling freely not from fear or regret, but because, in the moment he walked away, she understood that man had given up the darkness to hold on to the last flicker of light inside his heart, and she had witnessed it, the transformation, the first, the last, and the only witness. The coastal town in autumn carried a gentle chill, just enough to make one shiver stepping outside, yet soft enough to bring an odd sense of peace. Small shops lit their golden lamps from early morning. The scent of baked bread and coffee drifted through the cobblestone streets. In a quiet corner stood a modest little bakery called Bennett's, opening each morning at 6:30. A small bell chimed whenever the door opened, and the woman behind the counter always greeted customers with a gentle, reserved smile. Sarah Bennett, once Emily, had a new life now. She was no longer the exhausted taxi driver lost in the rain, no longer the mother awake through countless nights, worrying about hospital bills or strange shadows by her door. She owned this tiny bakery, known for its cinnamon loaves and old-fashioned apple pies. Every morning, she brewed coffee and placed a tray of pastries by the window for any drifter passing by. The townsfolk called her Miss Sarah and loved her quiet diligence. The way she remembered each customer's favorite treat. Benji, now Jacob, was 8. Taller, brighter, always smiling. He'd learned to write his new name in careful cursive and greeted every neighbor with a grin that melted grown hearts. He still kept the red toy car Logan had given him, displayed neatly on his desk, like a sacred charm no one was allowed to touch. When people asked, he'd simply say it was a gift from a kind man who had saved his mother and him on a rainy night long ago. He never mentioned the name Vincent Moretti, but sometimes he'd ask, "Mom, where does Uncle Logan live now? And Emily now?" Sarah would smile softly, stroke his hair, and answer, "Maybe somewhere far away, living quietly, just like us." Sometimes the past returned in whispers when she washed dishes at dusk, or when the town fell silent at night. She'd remember the motel room with blood on the floor, that desperate last embrace, the way Logan's eyes looked when he handed her the passports. Deep down, Sarah knew he was still alive, somewhere, keeping his promise to erase it all, to become someone else. But time stretches mercilessly. A year can dull the sharpest ache. A year can also convince you that miracles belong only to memory. One winter morning, while wiping the bakery's glass counter, she paused. A gust of wind rattled the chime above the door. Outside, the ocean sighed against the shore, white foam glistening like soap bubbles. Sarah exhaled, her palm resting on the warm cloth. She looked around her little bakery, every corner marked by quiet peace bought with blood and tears. She had come so far from fear to steadiness, from loss to knowing exactly who she was and what she needed. Jacob ran downstairs, jacket half-zipped, hair a tousled mess. "Mom, I'm off to school." She turned, handed him his lunchbox, straightened his collar, and kissed his forehead. "Be careful crossing the street. And look both ways." "I know, Mom," he grinned, darting out the door, his laughter filling the bakery like the first song of morning. When the door closed behind him, Sarah stood still. Her heart felt warm, steady, strangely calm. Over the past year, she'd learned how to live without waiting, how to love the present without letting the past steer it. Yet deep down, she kept a small, quiet space open just enough that, if one day someone were to walk in and order a black coffee with no sugar, she would know. And perhaps then, every unfinished chapter in her life would finally find its ending. That morning, the sky was gray, a thin drizzle veiling the coastal town. Sarah opened the bakery as usual, the small bell chiming its familiar tune. She wore a cream-colored sweater, her hair tied up neatly, hands moving swiftly as she prepared the first batch of cinnamon bread. Outside, raindrops clung to the glass like tiny memories, each one a glimmer of something once lived. She didn't think much anymore. She didn't wait. She didn't dare hope for promises too fragile to hold. Yet today felt different, something in the air. A rhythm slightly off. A heartbeat skipping for no reason she could name. At exactly 7:23, the door opened. Sarah turned toward the display case. Didn't look up. A man's voice, soft, low, carrying the ghost of a memory, broke the quiet. "One black coffee. No sugar." Her hand froze. Not because of the order, it was one she'd heard countless times, but because of that voice. Deep, roughened slightly, and yet impossibly gentle. She turned, her heart pounding, as if it were that same rain-soaked night all over again. The man standing before her wasn't the Logan she once knew. He wore a sand-colored jacket, a white shirt buttoned to the collar, hair cropped shorter, a pair of slim glasses giving him a thoughtful, almost scholarly air. But his eyes, those eyes still carried the same depth, the same quiet gravity that haunted her dreams. Sarah swallowed, steadying her voice. "Would you like anything else?" He smiled, slow, deliberate, filled with meaning. "My name's Michael Russo. I teach history at the community college 2 towns over. Just moved here a couple of weeks ago." She nodded, wordless, pouring the coffee into a dark ceramic cup. When she set it down, his fingers brushed hers, cold at first, then warming. A brief touch that carried a year's worth of waiting, of sleepless nights, of a boy's questions about a man who vanished into the rain. Sarah said nothing. Neither did he. They simply looked at each other, both afraid that if they spoke, the moment might dissolve like the rain outside, fading quietly into the sea. He took the cup of coffee and sipped. "Good," he said. "Just the way you made it last time." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, her hand tightening against the counter's edge. "I used to think I imagined you, that I made it all up." He set the cup down, leaning slightly closer. "You didn't imagine it. I really came back. It took a year, but I kept my word." She gave a small, broken laugh. "I thought your promise was just a way to help me let go." "And you?" she asked. He tilted his head, eyes never leaving hers. "I never meant to let go. I just needed time, enough time to erase everything that could ever hurt you or Benji. And now I'm here. Not as Vincent Moretti. I came with another name. Another life. No mafia. No blood. No darkness. The bakery was as quiet as ever. But for that instant, the world seemed to stand still. She didn't ask where he had been during that long year, or how he managed to walk away from an empire built on fear. She didn't have to, because if he was standing here, calm, with eyes that clear, it meant he had gone to the very edge of the dark and found his way back. She turned and poured him another cup. When she handed it over, he took her hand firmly. "Sarah," he said softly, "I didn't come just to thank you. I came to ask if I can stay, if you'll let me." She smiled, her eyes shimmering. "There's a table by the window," she whispered. "The sunlight there is beautiful at noon." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'll sit there, every day, until you tell me I can come into the kitchen with you." And when Benji came rushing into the bakery, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders, he froze. His eyes lit up. Uncle Logan crouched down, smiling. "I go by Michael now," he said. "But if you'd rather call me Logan, that's fine too." The boy threw his arms around him, holding tight. Sarah turned away quickly, hiding the tear that had already escaped down her cheek. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first sunlight of the day streamed through the window, falling over the half-finished cup of coffee, and there, finally, was a place for the man who had come home. A week after Logan's return, Sarah's little bakery had never been busier. The townspeople came not only for the scent of cinnamon or the rich black coffee, but for the warmth they saw in the eyes of the man who now sat by the window. Michael Russo, the new history teacher in town, was often there, reading, sometimes helping Benji with his homework. No one knew his real past, and Sarah never told. The only thing that mattered was that he was here, in flesh and blood, this time to stay. That afternoon, Benji climbed up onto a kitchen stool, fingers dusted with flour, playing with a box of pastry mix. "Mom," he asked, his voice innocent but curious, "is Uncle Michael ever going to leave again?" Sarah paused, looked at her son, and gently brushed his hair aside. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "This time, he's staying. For good." The answer lit up Benji's face. He jumped down and ran toward the front of the bakery, shouting with pure joy. "He's staying, Mom. Said he's really staying, Logan. Or rather..." Michael stood just outside the glass door, hearing every word. He didn't say anything, because there was nothing left to say. Everything he had ever needed was already contained in that single, fleeting moment. He was no longer a man swallowed by darkness, no longer the crime lord who once made a city tremble. He was simply a man learning how to live again from the beginning beside the woman he loved and the child who had unknowingly given him a family. Life has a way of turning when you least expect it. A single mother, once desperate to pay for her son's medicine, now owned a bakery and a real home. A mafia man who thought there was no way out now sat among strangers. No gun under his coat. No ghosts at his back. And it all began on one rainy night. With one ride. One stranger. And one simple choice not to leave someone who needed saving. The story of Emily, now Sarah, and Logan, now Michael, was no fairy tale. But it carried something rarer than magic, the human capacity to change, to let go, to forgive, and to love again. And maybe, sometimes, what we need isn't a new beginning, just someone who believes we deserve one. And what about you? After hearing this story, does the journey of Sarah and Michael remind you of something in your own life? Have you ever made a small decision that changed everything? Or are you still waiting for someone to return? The way Sarah once did. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, your reflections straight from the heart in the comments below. Because who knows? Maybe your story will be the one that touches someone else next. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and share it with the people you love. And subscribe to Underworld Love Stories to hear more moving tales, stories of love, redemption, and second chances, told every day. Thank you for staying with us until this very moment. We wish you good health, joy in every day, and peace in every heartbeat. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next story from Underworld Love Stories.